When I was 18 years old, I bought my first car. It wasn't all that nice, but I saved up and bought one that ran really well and had no major problems, so I was pretty excited about it. The car did, however, need to get new windshield wipers. The back ones worked fine, but every time I used the front ones, they did nothing. I went to Walmart one night and walked to the auto department to find some. I used the little book they had and found my car make and model, and then picked out the wipers that worked for my car. As I was picking them out, I noticed a man standing about 30 feet away, literally hiding behind a corner, aside from his head popping out staring at me. He was bald with a little hair on the side of his head and had thick glasses. I immediately was creeped out when I saw the way he was looking at me. I looked away fast, and he seemed to do the same. I figured it was just an awkward random moment, and I finished getting my wipers and then started walking back to the front of the store. As I walked back and was almost at the checkouts, I noticed a man was walking behind me by about 20 feet. This was slightly alarming, so instead of checking out and leaving, I decided to do a little test by doing a 180 and walking backwards to the opposite end of the store once again. I didn't see the man as I did this, and when I got to the other end of the store, I thought he was gone. That is, until I noticed him walk past me out of an aisle about 2 aisles away. At this point, I knew something was up. The store was not too busy at this hour, but I decided to walk around the outside of the store rather quickly, all the way around to the checkouts, to hopefully lose the man. When I did, I didn't see him at all, and I checked out and left the store. I approached my car at the back of the parking lot and decided to put the new windshield wipers on right then and there because we were expecting rain that night. It took me about 5 minutes to put them on, and as I was finishing up, I saw a car pulling up to the parking space right next to me. I was kind of annoyed by this because there was many spaces closer to the store that were open. It was an old beat-up car that's engine made a loud noise as if there was something wrong with it. I looked and saw that driving the car was the bald man with glasses. He was staring directly at me. Without hesitating, I ran around and jumped into my car and then started it and left. But just as I was afraid of, the car began to follow me. I turned onto the nearest road and then turned again. I turned at just about every opportunity I had to turn, and each time, the man would go with me. This went on for about 10 minutes before he randomly pulled over to the side of the road and stopped. I wasn't going to wonder why, though. I just kept driving and looking over my shoulder until I got home. I never saw the man again. I don't know what his deal was, but the way he looked at me still creeps me out. I used to have an old car that needed a lot of work. I was younger and into fixing things, so I considered my car one of my personal projects. I would go to the local auto shop quite often and buy new parts for it. It was a quiet little shop, and it was never very busy, but the people there were always nice and helpful to me. One thing that I started noticing when I went to the shop is that there was this area in the back where you could go and have service done to your car. It didn't seem like it was really used much at all, and almost every time I went there, I saw a man standing behind the window at the counter in the corner, and he would stare at me as I came in. After the first several times, I waved at him, but he never waved back. He just kind of stared and slightly smiled. I never saw him anywhere else, and I would only ever see him when I was walking in. When I would leave the shop sometimes, I'd look over, but he would never be there. It was something that I didn't really think about other than when I was at the shop, but when I was there, it just seemed kind of strange. On probably like the 10th time I went to the store and got something, when I was checking out, I finally asked the guy working who that man was that was always in the window. The man working seemed confused and told me nobody was working in that department at this time. After some more conversation, I described the man to him and how he always looked at me. The guy working then told me it sounded like I was describing him the original owner of the shop, who had died 10 years earlier. It was crazy to hear this, and after that, I never did see the man again. I have owned a car repair shop for the last 15 years. The scariest thing to ever happen was about 10 years ago. My shop is relatively small, but I do have several employees. One evening, at about 6 p.m., I was working at the front desk doing some paperwork. An older man then walked into the shop. He was wearing a black suit jacket and looked well put together. He came up to me and asked me if I would be able to fix his car. Now, we normally require appointments, but things were not all that busy at this time, so I asked the man what was wrong with his car. He told me he thought something seemed wrong with it, but he didn't know quite what, and that it occasionally broke down. I asked him a few more questions, but he didn't really give me any answers. The man then handed me the keys and told me he would come back the next day to pick up his car. Then he walked out of the shop. It was strange, because he didn't really allow me to say anything. He just gave me the keys and left. I didn't even get a chance to tell the man how long it would take or anything. I decided I would look at his car later that night. So when the rest of our work was done, I sent my 2 mechanics home, and I decided to finish the night by trying to fix the man's car. I got the keys and walked out to where he parked it. The car looked to be about 20 years old, was black, and seemed to be in pretty good shape. I got inside the car, and it was as clean as can be. I started it and drove it into the garage. Almost right after I got into the garage with it, the car just died. I got out and looked around at it. Then I was a little concerned to see that the car had no license plates on it. I opened up the hood, and everything seemed to be fine. Then after I shut the hood, the car started on its own. I was really surprised to see this, so I got the keys and went inside and shut the car off. It was beginning to freak me out a little bit, so I decided not to do any work on it until the man came back the next day and I got more information on it. I locked everything up at the shop and went home for the night. The next morning, I was the first one to show up like always, and I unlocked the place and went inside. When I got to the garage, the car was gone. I was shocked. I expected the man to come back that day, and I didn't know how to explain his car not being there. But the man never did show up. After that, I ended up reporting what happened to the police, but I really don't know if they were ever able to find anything. I never saw or heard from the man or his car again. Unfortunately, I didn't have security cameras at my shop at the time, so I may never know what happened. Sometimes, the whole thing seems like it was just a dream because of how strange it was, but I know it was real. This story was a pretty creepy thing that happened to me about 8 years ago now. It was the late summertime, and my parents got into a minor car accident with their car. Nobody was hurt, and the car accident was not their fault, so they were able to get enough money from the insurance to buy a car that was a little bit newer. Our car was pretty old, almost 20 years old actually, so we were looking to get a car with under 100,000 miles on it. I remember I went with my parents to look at some cars one Saturday, and we went to this really old dealership that was in town. We had drove past it here and there for years, but had never gone to it. When we got there, we saw that there was an older man who worked there, and he came out and introduced himself as the owner. From the very beginning, he just gave me the creeps. I don't know exactly why, but he just did. We told him the kind of car we were looking for, and he showed us a few. Then he invited us inside, and we all sat at a table inside his dealership and talked about the cars. I was only 14 at the time, so I don't remember a whole lot of what was said, but I do remember I felt uncomfortable in his shop with him. It was so old and run down inside, and after about 15 minutes of talking, we all finally left. We ended up not buying a new car from him, and we got a car from a different dealer about a week later. Then I would say about another week after that, the news came on after a baseball game that I was watching on TV. They announced that a man had been caught for a kidnapping and murder that had taken place several months before. Then they showed a picture of the man from the car dealership. I couldn't believe it. To this day, every time I think back to being at his shop with him, I get the chills. I am a 23-year-old female. This story took place last summer. I had just recently gotten a new car. Well, actually it was used, but it was only 8 years old and was much better than the 2003 car I had been driving. The car had no problems, but did need to get its tires rotated. So about a week after I bought it, I took it to a local mechanic. I had never been to the guy before, but his prices seemed pretty low. I drove the car to the shop, which was located on a quiet end of town and not really next to anything else. I went inside and gave the mechanic the keys. I had made the appointment online, and when I got there, he said it would be about 30 minutes or less and told me I could wait in the waiting room while the work was done. I went in and sat down in a chair in the waiting room. There was nobody else at the shop, and it was rather old. The place looked like it hadn't been updated at all since the 1980s. They even had a big box TV that was on, and it played the Weather Channel on it. I sat down and went on my phone for this time. When about 20 minutes had passed, the mechanic came back in and said that my car was done. After that, I drove back home and everything was normal. But about a week later, I was driving home from work one night, and I heard what sounded like a faint buzzing noise. I thought it was a bug in the car at first, so I rolled down a few windows and hoped it would fly out. But the sound kept going, and after I put the windows back up and listened closer, I could hear it wasn't exactly the sound of a bug. I drove the rest of the way home, and then turned my car off and listened. I didn't hear anything for a few seconds, but then I heard it again. I looked around my car and saw something behind the mirror. It was a little black thing that was mounted, and when I examined it, it appeared to be a camera. It was very well hidden, and I hadn't noticed it until looking extremely close. I ended up looking very closely around the rest of my car, and I ended up finding 2 more cameras. I took them inside and later brought them to the police. It turned out the mechanic put them in my car to spy on me. It was extremely creepy, and I never should have took my car to him in the first place.